Imagine having $70,000 saved up in your late 20s, not because you've been making six figures, but because you've mastered the art of living cheap. Ever since I can remember, my parents taught me that I should save up my money and I should spend very frugally. This is fantastic advice for people in their teens and 20s. I've known a lot of people my age who's been struggling financially, going paycheck to paycheck every month, and I never quite got that because I've always been spending less than my means. Meaning that I always have some spare cash laying around, but I much prefer seeing the numbers rise than just spending it on random material things. And it's giving me the freedom to have experiences that others might not be able to now because they needed to buy that newest phone or newest car, or whatever things that were trendy at the time. In a world where so many people are trapped by overspending, let me show how I found freedom in frugality. So I remember when I became a university student, I quickly saw the difference between my mindset and most people's mindsets. I wanted to go to parties, I wanted to have fun, I wanted to socialize, but I didn't want to spend a lot on alcohol. But what I saw is that a lot of the other people that I was going out with, they would spend so much money when we were actually out on alcohol where it was much more expensive, where I was pushing more towards let's just buy something cheap and let's drink something at home before we go out and then we don't need to buy anymore. And that meant I might have spent $20 a night where some people they would spend like $100 a night. That's a big difference over the long term. Imagine you do this for a year. That's a lot of money saved in the long term. And you don't have that much money as a student, at least not in my case. So that really made a huge difference that I was so frugal. Then as I graduated and got my first job, which was quite far away, I needed a car for that, since it would take me 1.5 hours to get there by train. And I was specifically looking for the smallest cars possible. And of course used cars as well. So I found a used Hyundai i10, which is serving me very well even today when I have a better job that's closer to my home. It's such a useful small little car. In Denmark, the car prices are quite crazy, so no matter which car you get, you're still gonna pay quite a bit, but for what was on the market at the time, this was one of the cheaper options. And I didn't have to take out a loan to buy it, so I just bought it right on the spot, and it doesn't affect me today that I bought that car. Additionally, another habit that I built up very early on is that I rarely ate out anywhere. I would almost always make my own lunch boxes and I would make simple meals at home, or I would visit my parents. They would give me like 4 days worth of food to take it back to my university dorm. And that meant I saved a ton of money on food and on groceries, and that also really adds up in the long term. And then finally, I would not spend any money on luxury items. I literally had holes in my Vans. I would walk around in those shoes for years, calling them my festival shoes and not really caring about the fact that there was a huge hole in the back. And I would buy like cheap Converse knockoffs that were like 1/8 of the price, that were basically for free, just because I wanted to live so frugally. And when I look back, I wasn't really depriving myself. I was prioritizing experiences and long-term freedom over short-term pleasure. And that basically meant that when I was done studying, I had, I think, around 20k saved up, $20k. And that gave me a lot of freedom to not worry about, I really need to get a job quickly now, I need to make the money back. I was not too concerned about any of that. I had more time to pursue my passions and do things I really liked. And I think the main benefits of living cheap is that you get a lot of financial freedom, you get a lot of mental clarity, and you have the ability to invest early. You have no stresses about unexpected expenses, you have the flexibility to take risks like changing jobs or pursuing a side hustle, and you have less focus on materialism, and that leads to way more clarity about what truly matters. I've been preaching minimalism for quite a while now, not so much on this channel, but the people that know me know that I tend to sell a lot of stuff, I tend to cut things out of my life that I don't think is serving me, and that can really free up a lot of mental space for focusing on what really matters. And I started investing my money, I think around 4 or 5 years ago. Every dollar you save in your 20s, they're gonna be worth way more in your 30s and 40s, so the earlier you start, the better. And that's not only in stocks. I invested a lot of money in myself, in my early 20s as well, in mentors and courses, things that will build my skills, and things that would push me socially as well, since that was an area I worked a lot on back then. And looking back at this journey I've had in my 20s of living cheaply to give me more freedom, I want to share with you some insights that I got if you want to follow along my footsteps and end up with 70k or potentially much more saved up in your 20s. First of all, cut the major expenses. If you need to move out, try to live with roommates or live in a smaller space. You probably don't need a huge palace to live in if you're in your 20s. And try to buy used cars instead of new ones if you even need one. Most people, they don't really need a car. I really didn't need a car till after university when I was getting my first job that was quite far away. So if you can't get away with not having a car, then I would not recommend you getting one. I also have a motorcycle now, but that's really because I decided that the experience of riding a motorcycle is worth the money I spend on it now, but I can also afford it. I wanted to get a motorcycle for 10 years, but I waited till it was an economically wise decision for me to get one. And next, I want you to avoid lifestyle inflation. So when you get a raise, don't raise your expenses. Raise your savings instead. And this also goes with getting your first job out of university or out of school. Don't just raise your expenses as soon as that happens. Think about your future self and what they would appreciate. On that note, invest early and consistently. In Denmark, where I live, we use an app called Nordnet, and here you can automate your investments every month into index funds, which is what I'm currently doing. So I'm currently investing, I think it's the equivalent of $1,500 every single month that I just put into the S&P 500, or actually the Danish equivalent of the S&P 500. And you don't have to start with that amount. You can start with $500 and just do that consistently every single month and get an app or some kind of system to automate that for you. So the way I see it is those money, they basically don't exist out of my paycheck. They are just taken out, and I don't even think of them as money I earn. They just go passively into my index funds. Next tip is that you should focus on the essentials that improve your life. Things like healthy food and gym memberships or education that boost your physical and mental health. Investing in yourself is so high return on investment. Investing in a mentor that can help you build a certain skill set, like what I did with photography, really comes back 10x. I would never be able to make $8,000 by not investing in a $1,000 course for photography in the amount of time that I did it. And finally, some common pitfalls is you want to avoid keeping up with the Joneses. It's quite common to see your colleagues, your friends, get something new, like a new nice shiny watch, a new trench coat. But I want to challenge you to avoid keeping up with them, in the sense of that you need the same material things. It's probably not going to bring you much happiness. Maybe it is for the first couple of days, but then it's just going to be normalized and you won't really appreciate those things that much. So I'd recommend you to skip the designer items, cut out the excessive nights out, because one Saturday night out with lots of booze and food afterwards, it can be so expensive that you could spend that on 7 other experiences that would probably bring you much more happiness. And apart from these tips, I want to address some common concerns that people might have from living cheaply like I did in most of my 20s. First one is, doesn't living cheap mean missing out? Me personally, I don't think so. I focus on experiences, having adventures and hobbies. They're way better than material possessions in my book. But what if I make a low income? Well, even the small savings, they add up. Learn skills to upskill or explore some side hustles. You won't have a low income in a couple of years from now. How do I stay disciplined? Align your spending with your long-term goals. Ask yourself, will this purchase bring me lasting value? And finally, the conclusion I came to by living this way was that living cheap in my 20s definitely wasn't glamorous, but it was very empowering. It gave me options that money alone can't buy. Freedom, peace of mind, and the ability to design my life. I really want to encourage you to think critically about your spending. If you don't have a budget tracking sheet, or you're not at least on a weekly basis thinking about how you're spending your money, try to think about what's one expense you can cut out today to bring you closer to freedom tomorrow. Let me know in the comments.